Here's a quick video overview of my KTM 1090R 2018 model, just under 20,000 miles on it. It's been phenomenal, so I'm just going to run through some of the modifications, things I like, etc. So I personally believe that this is one of the most underrated bikes out there. This was intended to be the off-roady version of the 1090R, 1190R, 1290R, or 1290 Super Adventure. And this one's 125 horsepower. My wife and I rode it 2 up to Idaho last weekend, and it did just phenomenal, fully loaded with at least 20-30 pounds of luggage. And I'm a big guy, 6'5", weigh 230 or so, and she's about 150 pounds, 145. So it was a big load, and this bike was just awesome. Kind of does it all well. I think the only reason this bike isn't shining is because of the new 890s and 901 Norden just being so compelling and sexy. And other than that, I think that this bike is sort of like a little bit like the KTM 950 Super Enduro, which just didn't sell well from the factory, but is and was a phenomenal bike. I think that more people should be buying these and running them. So here's a just quick overview of its setup. So I do ride on this one about, honestly, realistically, 80 to 90% on the street. I have a 701 Enduro. I've had 500 Enduros. We're in Utah. We ride hard, desert style. This guy is mostly just a street bike, but I do like having off-road capability. And my general style is having a tire in the front that overpowers the rear, because the rear can always kind of slide around. But in the front, and you just need to be somewhat self-clearing. I don't really ever ride in mud, just because we're in the desert. Sometimes we get some slick, snotty stuff, but try to avoid that. But my technique in general is always have a slightly more off-roady tire that does well. Now, because I do ride this 90% on the street, I just opted to mount up this guy, which I believe this is kind of a sleeper tire. It's a Shinko 700, and in this largest size, which is the 3.0-21. 21-inch rim, tubeless. It's their only one in version of that tire, which is tubeless, but you can see it's pretty freaking knobby, yet at the same time smooth and fast for on-road. It doesn't feel like a knobby at all. They call it a 60-40 street, 40% off-road, and that's great. And so I only have one ride on it. Probably a little too early to say how well it does. It's also cheap too, like $65 for a tubeless tire. I had a complete Motoz GPS setup, so I'm still running that tire in the rear, running it in the off-road position where the lugs are here. That's my one and only criticism of Motoz tires in general, is that they always have this like little corner designed to bring the back of the tire back in when you're sliding around, which I just don't like. It makes it handle weird. I've never gotten used to it. But that said, again, this thing is 90% on the road. So I like having, it's sort of like my truck here, having like decent off-roady tire. So in this case, the tire is a Toyo AT3, my favorite tire of all time after having Nittos and all sorts of stuff. And it's basically the same setup here, where it's, kind of like, sort of like a street bike with long travel that's wearing hiking boots. Like, that's kind of the best way to put it. So modifications, I have a high fender kit. It's a tusk setup. Comes with like kind of this bulbous, ugly fender. And I also found that on big, long climbs, I was running a bit high. So I put on this fairly cheap Supermoto fender. And I found that on my own, but I found that KTM Twins, when you pop in 1090R, it offers this model. So it has those fins and the airflow here. The old one used to come right in front and block a massive amount of the radiator, and I found that this now allows for air, but you can see a bit of mud does get up there. In a kind of weird way, I almost wish I had a hybrid where I had the low original fender just to keep the mud out here. but it, you know, I'd have to stay out of the way. So maybe I'd cut it or trim it up somehow. So that's my only issue there. Criticism is mud. I think this is like a genuine KTM aftermarket part. Tusk handguards that are pretty good. They're a little dinky. I've had one fall over where this thing rotated down a little bit. I just kind of pulled it back up. All of my bikes, I trim the ball off the knob. I don't understand why they put those on motorcycles. I think it's the weirdest thing. Forget the name of these grips, but they're super fat. These came on here. I did add a, I think it's called a Keiko aftermarket throttle locks. It's not a cruise control, but you use in that function. What you do is you grab the grip and the throttle lock and twist it together, and then it stays in that position. So you can see it's sort of locked in place here. And that's basically the cruise control, which is great. I like the 1090R because it's stripped down. Tusk bag, the bigger Olympus bag, fits perfectly, and I actually think it's a great, phenomenal bag, growing on me more and more. So Tusk is Rocky Mountain ATV's in-house brand. We're here in Utah. You know, I used to think it was kind of cheesy, rip-off, aftermarket stuff. But everyone who works there are super passionate. They make great products. You know, they make such a wide range that honestly their attention to detail is remarkable. You know, they have their own style. Their pricing is amazing. I'm kind of like sick of overpriced, stupid, douchebaggy motorcycle parts and prices that are just insane. It's just like rip off Central, especially because they depreciate so much. So these bikes are quite cheap. Like you can get one now, $7,500 stock, $8,500 like this, like well set up. So it came with the racks. The guy had put on the 1190 or 1290R aluminum rear. So I was able to mount this Tusk. I had to drill holes through it by hand into an aluminum mount. So people complain that the original plastic one isn't durable enough for the big Tusk aftermarket large plate for your bags. So I haven't had an issue because it came with this. And then Tusk bags, which are also just phenomenal. So I'm like kind of a Tusk fanboy here, and I order almost all my shit. This tire, everything came from Rocky Mountain ATV. And it's just a phenomenal bike. 8 inches of travel, very tall in this high setting. The only criticisms of this bike that I hear are basically 3 things. One is that it runs hot. So he had ordered this KTM power part seat. I found that in the low setting, I could feel a bit of heat in my crotch, a little more than normal. In the high setting, none of it. So I don't feel any extra heat beyond what any normal motorcycle would be. So that's number one. Number two is the fuel pump supposedly is pretty susceptible to failure. So you can see there's a plug here. I don't know exactly where it is, but I'm imagining it's down on this side or somewhere in there. And what I hear is that it's in the tank and submersed. So if you just run the fuel low, then you can kill the fuel pump prematurely, and it's $500. There's a couple aftermarket solutions, but nothing seems to be as durable as the original one. And then the third is that the crank position sensor can go bad. So I think those are fairly cheap. The fuel pumps are like $500, the genuine KTM ones. The crank position sensors, I honestly don't know, but my guess is $50 for one of those. So if I was doing real long trips, we just did a 500-mile trip, never replaced the fuel pump, never had any issues, never had a breakdown, etc. It's just been phenomenal. Same for me and the previous owner, my friend Chad, who sold me the bike. So these Tusk racks are interesting. If you look on the right, it sticks out a bit more than the left. On the left, it's designed to, you know, be somewhat in line there, yet still has the clearance for adding a roto packs. So that's been awesome for camping. So this is basically a campy ADV off-road capable touring bike, a lot like a 1200 GS or 1250 GS or whatever, but it's not a fat pig. It's comfortable, it's super fast, 125 horsepower is more than enough. It's just been phenomenal. I think my only complaint whatsoever Maybe if somehow that heat issue is there, but I haven't experienced it. But really my only complaint whatsoever is not having built-in cruise control. And all of the bikes of this era were that way. So I just use this. I'm getting more and more used to how it works. I placed it so that this knob was kind of in the, this little adjustment screw is in the ideal place. So boom, when that's upright, vertical, that's when I know my throttle lock is in the ideal position. The more I turn it, the more pressure it adds, which pushes the throttle this way, which eventually could potentially maybe cause some issues. So I just try to keep it there. So I keep that in that position, and then boom, you just pull it off and the thing's fine. So it's a pretty good setup. And I have no other complaints. I guess maybe this little bar, I think this is aftermarket. It's just a little squiggly here for carrying phones and stuff. I'm sure I could do a better setup. I'm going to pull out this cigarette lighter and put in a USB. And that's it. I mean, it's freaking sweet. Other mods that you can't see is that it has a foam filter underneath. It still runs the factory jetting. It's kind of like a really nicely modified basic bike, and these are so reasonable. I don't understand why people would buy new bikes based on how reasonable these are. And that's it. So yeah, it's 2024. This is the unsung hero of aftermarket of off-road adventure bikes. And they're cheap, and the 1190s are cheap. Like, these KTM bikes are great. I like this headlight a lot more than like kind of the later model ones. I feel like they're kind of like really slicey looking. So I like this older style, which I guess was also on like 2014 1190s, etc. I can't believe it's been that long. I rode on my 701 or 501 behind Quinn Cody from KTM when they came up for the KTM rally. We were doing some crazy off-road stuff, and the gearing on this is very, very fast. Like, you can be in first gear and hit like 40. So if I wanted to be more off-roady, I'd drop it. Again, because I'm riding mostly street, I just leave it at the stock. But I rode off-road stuff. We rode American Fork Canyon in Utah, which is like way up there, crazy high elevation. I'm in Salt Lake City, but it's basically on the other side of that range. A little smoky today because of fires. Those are 11,000 foot peaks. We rode like way up here, crazy single track, and Quinn Cody was on one of these, and it was amazing. I couldn't believe what he rode on this thing. And just to show what it's capable of, you can't do that on a 1200 GS. I rode a 1250 GS to Baja 3 years ago, and we couldn't even take them on the beach because they were just too fat, too heavy. So my setup for luggage, I just have the cheapo. I have the best Nelson rig setup, but they're pretty thin. They're like stand-up paddleboard material, so I could see them tearing. The new Moscow luggage, at some point I'll write or maybe do a video about luggage. The new Moscow luggage has reinforcements on it, keeps it light, but has, scrape reinforcements, which is all that needs. That said, I'm a pretty strong rider, so I stay upright. I've had one get off and they've been fine, and they're so cheap. They're like $200 for a set of panniers. But, so it's sort of like the Harbor Freight setup. Like, you can buy 2 or 3 sets for what you can pay for this setup. But that Moscow lightweight setup is going to be a game changer. These Tusk racks have the built-in remover, so what I'll do is add Tusk plates, maybe do something like that. Right now I have the Nelson rig plates, and they're okay. Again, that's a separate video that I haven't created yet, but probably will soon. Just follow my handle and I'll get that up. So thank you. Appreciate your time.